This light, sorry.
Awesome. All right. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to our week one sync. After seeing everyone's participation in Slack and everything and looking at your pull requests, it looked like it was a really good week. So congrats on making it through week one. The kind of agenda for today is we will start off with demos. So each pair will talk through their code, what they worked on, and just, walk us through all of that. We do have a learning module this week. It's going to be all about code reviews. So we'll go through that. And then really the final thing we have to do is just pair off again for this upcoming week. We'll go over the issues and decide who's going to tackle what. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, Matt, if you want to take over on the demos, go for it.
Sounds great. Well, so there were two different issues that y'all are working on this week in pairs. And one of them was issue number one, which I think was related to maybe the list of items for the shopping list. And then the second issue was related to the navigation for the site. So I guess, does either group, prefer to go first here? Or does it not really matter? Doesn't really matter. All right. So I guess then let's start with the navigation one, if that's okay. So that would be Shell and Sarah. So you see if it needs to be me that assigns people. You need to. Okay. Yeah.
I allowed everyone to share. So if you want to share your screen,
perfect. Yeah.
And y'all can just kind of talk us through it.
Awesome. I think Sarah, you wanted to share your screen, correct?
Yeah.
So first we'll be demoing our app, going through the UI, and then we'll talk about the code after.
Okay. Does everyone see it?
I can see it, yeah.
Awesome.
Okay, so our issue is being able to navigate through the different routes of the app. And here we have our homepage. Here at the bottom, we have our navigation links. Each link goes to a different view of the website. And you can also see that on the address bar, that also reflects the page we are currently on. Mm-hmm. And the contents of the page also changes depending on the route that we are in. So we are basically going to make the navigation links functional in the app, so that when the user clicks on the link, the proper page view is rendered. We'll go ahead and look at our code.
Give me 1 second. And I'm having, Ashel, do you have that up? I'm so sorry. I'm having issues out here.
Do I just also click screen share?
Yeah.
I got that.
Okay. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Sweet. Okay. Okay. So to preface, the original code actually used anchor tags as a way to navigate to these pages. However, as we learned this week, there's a better way to implement routing in our app. And actually, I think anchor tags are more useful for maybe absolute paths or external links. In other words, pages outside of the application. But instead, we are going to use the navlink component, which I think is more effective, as we learned when it comes to pages within the application itself. So here on line 1, we are importing our navlink component from the React Router DOM library. And the React Router DOM library is responsible for controlling what's displayed on the page based on the URL or clicking on a link. And navlink is a part of that library. And our routes are actually already defined in app.jsx, which you'll see right here. And which is the entry point of our app. And this is important because we need to have our routes defined first before setting up navigation to them. And having said that, on line 5, we have our layout component here, and you can see it's returning several elements, but we are going to focus on line 16, which is the navlink elements right here. And you'll notice also that the navlink elements are wrapped around this nav element. And this is helpful because it tells our browser and all other like assistive tech to identify like the meaning and basically telling the browser this is where our navigation links are. So, and inside that we have the 3 navlink elements that correspond to the different pages of the app right here. And I'll go ahead and pass the torch to Sarah to kind of talk more about that in detail.
Yeah, so going to, that's I think on line 16, 19, and 22, those navlink tags. Again, before those had been the anchor tags with the href that just navigated to the pound sign. And so before this, the links were not functional. So using navlink, as Ashel had said, it is more useful, sorry for my dog, than anchor tags for navigating within the site. And there are also some special kind of features that make it useful here. One of them being the active class, which we will chat about in just a second. And so one of the things you'll see within navlink is the 2 props. And so for home, that's to the / under list, it's to list, an add item to add item. And those are all taken from, I believe, as Ashel said, from app.jsx, from the routes within there. And so those are what allows you to click on the different navigation links and direct you to the correct page. Let's see, and the final thing is the active class. And so as opposed to anchor tags, navlink automatically has this active class that is connected to it, and that will apply an active style to an active link. And so if you remember from looking at, and you can see from looking at the site right now, when you are on home or on list or on add item, that navigation link at the bottom looks different. So you can tell that that is the active page. Let's see. Ashel, is there anything else I'm missing there?
I think we got him.
Awesome.
As far as I know.
Any questions from anyone?
I don't have any questions. I think I had noticed back in the description for it that like prior to your PR here, you would have had to type in /list into the address bar in order to get routed to that part of the site. And that should still work as far as like if you needed permalinks or whatever, that they would still resolve in the same way. So it's good to kind of have the best of both worlds there. And that honestly, like the active link thing, I didn't know that. So glad to see it.
Yeah, really great job, you two.
Yeah,
awesome.
Great job. All right. Well, I think we're going to move over to Alexandria and Randall. And if y'all want to take over.
Cool. I'll be sharing my screen, which I'll do. And Randall will start us off.
Okay. I guess I'll start with, before we started getting into the code, well, let me first talk about what we had to do. First, we had to get the list to render, and I'll also talk about how we got that to work. But just to get there, we had to do a little bit of setup. So in pair programming, I was unfamiliar with the process and unfamiliar with Git and pull requests and all that, things that I wished I was taught, but I got to learn here. So we went through how to navigate. We practiced a little bit, went through navigation and pair programming. We looked at the documentation to look up how we can get this list to render. And she was a wonderful help in teaching me how to merge, how to pull, and how things work in a process with a duo. So for me, a lot of it was just kind of learning how to set up and communicating and things like that. And through that, I'll pass it off to Alex, and she can share what we did with the code.
Yeah, Randall was awesome. Randall, when we pair program, we practiced like navigation and driving, where Randall was navigating me while I was driving and typing out the code, and we were reviewing some React docs. And with our goal to display the user's shopping list items, we used the map function in our return of the list component. So we understood that data is being pulled from Firebase that is accessed through the app component through the stream list items function down here. And with that, we were able to access all of that information. And so in our return, we used the map function over the data array of information, which basically creates a new array that maps through each element of the data. And so we said that for each item element within it, it would return the list item component using dot notation of the item's key and the item's name properties. And so looking at the list item component, it would be returning this list item HTML with the past property of the name that we are getting from the mapped data. And that's why it's reflected here. And yeah, it's when we first created our pull request, we had created a function variable before the return, but we later learned that we could be more efficient by just returning it in directly within the return part of the list component, because we're not listing the shopping list items in more than one place. And we were given notes that it's best practice to comment out the reasons of what your components are doing, and to clean up our code where we may have left console logs and such. But yes, we learned a lot, and it was really great working with Randall too. Yeah. If there's any questions, let us know.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, I think y'all did a great job with this, and I didn't necessarily have any specific questions, but were there any nuggets that you had picked up from the React docs that you had been looking through that spring to mind, if you will?
Just in general, sorry if you don't mind, just in general, just that there's more than one way to skin a cat. I know it's unopinionated, and that's partly what scared the crap out of me when we were doing it, because I got so used to Python before I went to React. So, so going, okay, what's the best way to do this? And knowing that getting support from you guys, from mentors, and getting that is reassuring to say, okay, this can work, or this is how it works best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's great to hear. And I can tell you, at least from my limited understanding, that if you ever heard of Go programming language, apparently there's a phrase, idiomatic Go, which sort of means the right way to write Go. And I get the impression that Python can be a lot of the same ways, and JavaScript, on the other hand, is not. Choose your own adventure in so many ways. So it can be tricky to navigate in that way.
Agreed.
Great job, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, great job.
Anything for you, Alex, you wanted to share?
Oh, I guess for me, I knew there are many ways to map through arrays, and the way that I'm used to mapping it was you call the element and then you use dot notation. But I think I was shown another way to do it by actively calling on the properties within the, I forget what you call it, but I think it was Matt who showed me the example code of what yeah, and so I reviewed the docs that I think DJ sent me, and I was like, oh, that's cool. That is another way you could do it.
Yeah, and in fact, it's also there on line 4. I don't remember offhand, but I think usually functional, I guess it's called functional components in React, the first property or the first argument is props. But a lot of times when you see it, they'll destructure it into just whatever the name of the font they want is.
Yes.
Right. Which it seemed more efficient to me because like I destructure it later rather than in the beginning. So yeah, it was cool to see that.
I spent last night looking at my old boot camps videos, and then I asked Chat GPT what are different ways to so many possibilities. Too many options.
I love that you say that, Randall, because I saw a meme last night that was like everyone looking at Chat GPT for help. Like Stack Overflow is kind of like above water.
I saw that one.
Documentation is like underwater, like no one's looking at it. But it's so funny because Chat GPT honestly does give legit answers. So it's like, well, you know.
I know. It's scary. But
I wouldn't always
use it for meal planning.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like Wikipedia. It's a great place to start, right?
Yeah.
And then in the end, you still have to think through what am I going to use? What am I going to apply?
Of course.
And a great learning tool.
This is random, but I asked ChatGPT to give me like 5 recommendations for like different categories. Like if I'm like an intro, like the software developer, like what are 5 podcasts, 5 books, 5 YouTube channels that you recommended? And it gave me like a really good list and some books that I didn't even think about. So I was like, okay. Noted, ChatGPT.
Yeah.
But okay, I'll stop sharing now.
Thanks, Alex.
All right. Yeah, really great job on the demos. Again, great teamwork all around. So bravo to everybody. All right, let's switch gears a little bit and jump into our learning module for the week. And this week it's all about, let me get this up here. Okay, everyone can see, right? Are we good?
I'm good.
Awesome. All right, so all about code reviews. So you might be wondering like, oh, wait, we should have talked about this last week, right? Because we had to do this for our pull request this week. But I think you'll find that as we go throughout this program, it's like, there's a lot of experiential learning, right? You got to figure things out on the fly, find out maybe what works best for you. And then in kind of retrospect, we'll like go through and be like, here are some tips moving forward that can help like kind of hone that skill even more. So let's go through it. Let's talk about it. So we're going to kind of go over what is a code review, the code review cycle, what that looks like, what makes a code review a great code review, how you can help others review your code, how you can review other people's code, and then just kind of talking about some things in the GitHub UI as far as going through pull requests and that sort of thing. Cool. Okay, so first of all, what is a code review? It's a conversation about a set of changes, right? So like we talked about last week with GitHub, everything kind of lives on main, right? That's like the application, all of the working code that's in production. So whenever you are working on a feature branch with your partner or on your own, right, you branch off of main and then you add whatever features you're going to do, and then you open that pull request. So really this review process is basically saying, hey, here's what I've done, and here's what I'd like to add to what we already have. Number 2, it's one of the best spaces to share knowledge and learn from others. Like I can't emphasize this enough. On the day-to-day pull requests, like you can just learn so much from other people, whether it's suggestions that they offer, or if you're reviewing other people's code, you can say, wow, I didn't know you could do that. It's just a great way to kind of share ideas and see how things get done. It's a collaboration space where you can share your work and ask questions. So that's super important. And like I said, it really, really does help you improve as a developer. So if you're ever working through like a new concept or, you know, a new kind of library or anything, you know, going through these review steps can definitely help you grow. And then also from a whole kind of team perspective, like what we're doing right now, it decentralizes knowledge. So really what that means is like, you know, usually if you're on a team, you don't want one person to know how everything works and then other people are just kind of like in the dark, right? Whenever we have really good code review processes, everyone is on the same page. So even if you didn't write the code, you know exactly what every line of code is doing in every component. And so again, that's just kind of a way to share knowledge, to share responsibility for the app that you're building. and to improve the code base quality overall, right? Those are all just really important aspects of the code review. Cool. So let's talk about the code review cycle. This is probably going to sound really familiar to what you all just experienced this week, right? So you go through, you work on your code, and you open a pull request. That's always a good feeling. And then once you've tagged other people to review, you receive feedback, right? And again, that feedback can be praise and be like, hey, that's awesome, great job. Or it can be a suggestion like, hey, have you tried writing it this way? Or, maybe this particular line isn't working as expected. Here's something to think about. So then you go through and make changes, and then you can kind of receive feedback on those changes. So once everything has been addressed, everyone's approved, boom, you get to merge, right? So that's kind of the cycle, if you will, of opening the PR all the way through merging. Cool. Any questions so far? Nothing too crazy at this point. Awesome. Feel free to raise your hand, drop questions in the chat as they come up. So what are some things that can make a great code review? Well, number one, try not to focus on stylistic changes, right? There are tools for that, such as Prettier, ESLint, and type checkers. Is everyone familiar with Prettier and ESLint, sort of? So yeah, they're basically libraries that, help your code look a certain way in VS Code or whatever code editor you're using. ESLint is also a set of rules that says in every file, we're going to have 2 spaces of separation on every line or whatever, right? There's a lot of rules you can set up. So all that to say is the stylistic stuff, while it's important to point out, if you're new to things, maybe don't have that be the only thing that you focus on. So things like you missed a semicolon here, you can add a space there, tabs, spaces, et cetera, maybe not the most important thing to comment on. Number 2, you definitely want to try out the feature locally in a test environment. So what you can do is you can actually pull their branch down onto your into your environment. You can open it up, you can explore the app running locally, and you can see how it works. So that's definitely something to help just, again, kind of understand everything that's happening in their code. Another cool thing that GitHub does is they actually produce a link in a pull request that takes you to kind of a site that you can demo that particular branch on. So yeah, if you're not running locally, you can always use that link to kind of explore and see what's going on. Number 3, something to kind of think about is, will you understand this code a month from now? And so what this means is you can get very clever. You can get very you can write something that seems really cool, but it can also be very cryptic. And you'll be a month from now, what the heck does this do? What does this mean? Right. So that's kind of again, kind of thinking about sharing knowledge, sharing responsibility, is making sure that code is clear, code is documented, so that when you revisit it down the road, everyone's on the same page. Number 4, 5, and 6, I think, are super important. Again, just kind of radiating positivity, give praise, be kind and empathetic, and then usually, again, always default to approval, right? So you'll notice in GitHub there are 3 options. There's either comment, approve, or request changes, I think. Usually, again, I think defaulting to just approving it means that you trust your teammates to address the feedback, and whenever that feedback is addressed, then they can merge, right? So I think, again, that's kind of a preference thing. It's not an always you have to do that. But again, I think it just instills a sense of trust in your teammates. Cool. You can help others understand your changes. You can try to answer all the questions. And lastly, definitely take your time, right? If you're just kind of skimming through a code review, it's possible you could miss a detail, right? You really want to give your teammates the time that you would also hope whenever they're looking through your code. Cool. All right. So this kind of gets back to, running the code locally in your own environment. But it is important, especially as things get more complex, to try features out locally or in a test environment. So number 1, it gives you the confidence to say, I've actually run this. This is the behavior that I saw, and this is the comment that I'm going to leave, right, because of that. it also helps you find things that you wouldn't just from reading the code, right? Again, we can all look through code and have a good understanding of what's happening, but until we actually see it in action, then we may not know exactly what's happening. So that's super important. Next, resist the temptation to skip it or just say LGTM. Looks good to me, right? Again, you'll see this sometimes, especially if things are moving really quickly. But usually, if it's just a looks good to me, it's like, yeah, I kind of looked at this, it's probably fine. But that could potentially introduce bugs. Again, you just kind of want to give it a little bit more of an in-depth look. Now, with that said, in the pull requests, sometimes there will be instructions for how to run the code. So we have that in our PR template. You'll notice at the bottom section, it was like, other notes for testing and that sort of thing. It's super helpful to like fill that in just so teammates can know exactly what to do when they're testing it out. And then again, if you're not sure about something, just ask questions, right? These are really, really great learning opportunities. So definitely take advantage of that. All right, I'll stop again for questions. Anything in your minds? We're good so far.
So far, so good. Thanks.
Awesome. All right. So how can you help others review your code, right? So again, you're about to open a pull request. What are the steps that you can take? Well, first of all, add a meaningful PR description. Don't just be like, I want to push up some code, or this is something I worked on this week, right? What does your code do? Why is it important? Like, what are the changes that are going to be taking place? That's kind of what you're looking for in the description. Wherever possible, write meaningful commit messages. This is something that I had to learn a lot, especially when, again, I was going from like learning on my own, doing my own projects to collaborating on a team. It's like when you're working on your own and you're committing things to GitHub, it doesn't matter, right? I was the only one looking at those commit messages. But when you have other people to consider, get a commit message that's just like changes or updates, doesn't really say exactly what you're updating, right? So you want to have like, again, doesn't have to be a paragraph. Obviously, you want to keep it to like, just a few words, maybe a sentence at most, but like try to have a meaningful commit message when possible so that others can see kind of your progression.
Helps future you too.
Definitely helps future you for sure.
One difference between the commit messages and the PR description is that those commit messages stay with the source control. So like if you're using like GitLens or some other kind of tooling, like right in your editor where you can see, who did the last line and what was in the commit, then, it shows up right there.
Yeah.
So that's another aspect of what's different there.
Definitely. Yeah. Another important thing is to self-review your code. I fall into this trap all the time, whether it's forgetting a console.log line or, having some commented code that I left in that doesn't need to be there. It's always important to kind of just go through what you did and what your team did, just to kind of make sure there aren't any obvious things, right, that probably shouldn't be there. So explain why you did what you did. And potentially also ask questions, right? It's totally fine to say, I wasn't sure about this particular, line of code. Is there maybe a better way to do that? Again, asking questions in your PR, if you're the one writing it, totally fine. It's good to be able to say, hey, definitely open to feedback and suggestions there. This last one is also huge. Use screen capturing tools, right? Screenshots, if you want to get fancier and do video, whether it's through, Loom, Sketch, Zappy, I use QuickTime just to do like, just to grab some screen recordings. You can actually walk through your app, highlight the functionality that you did. And you don't necessarily have to talk through it if you don't want to. You can just literally just like, navigate through it. But you can add that to your PR so that people reviewing it can see this is what it's intended to do. So that's super helpful. So definitely recommend that. All right. So let's get into GitHub. So a lot of this is probably familiar by now that you've all had a chance to do it once. But there is a way to explore commit by commit. So you can kind of see here up in the top tab here, there are some different some different options. So the one that I usually focus on is the files change. That way you can see exactly what has changed with this pull request. And you can also change from each commit. So if you click on changes from one commit, you can see the other ones down here. If you were to click on the second or third one, you'll be able to see exactly what changes took place. And then you can also navigate through here, either doing next or previous. This particular line also is kind of important. I think you can see the lines of code that were changed or added, and you can see the lines that were deleted. So, 800 lines of code changing in one commit, that's actually a really big commit usually. But it just kind of gives you an idea of like the scope, I guess, of what you're looking through. So you can just kind of know that that's what's happening.
I think one of the issues this upcoming week includes installing a package.
Oh, sure.
And that'll probably affect the package lock file, and that
Yeah.
line will go out the door.
For sure. Yeah. And that stuff doesn't matter. Like when you install a new library, again, a new package, whatever, that doesn't matter. It's like, actual like maybe code that you wrote
Right.
in a set of files, that's when that number becomes a bit more interesting.
I don't know if y'all have come across this as like a good practice for most PRs, but have y'all sort of learned about like trying to keep things generally like small and in scope, because it makes it more straightforward to review it? Does that cross anybody's like learnings yet?
For commits or for like in general?
For pull requests, like for changes
pull
that you're
requests.
proposing? I guess to give you an example, like, a lot of times the advice in these things is like try to stick to the scope of the issue that's at hand. And so, for example, like if you had decided to start working on styling during the same commit, or maybe you decided to, I don't know, define some kind of custom React hook or something like that.
Yeah.
As part of your change, then that becomes not just a burden for you to have gone through for that change prior to even getting it reviewed, but then the same for the reviewer to consider the thing that you're proposing and like, well, are we biting off more than what we need here? Does that make sense? So that line count thing can also be kind of it's not necessarily the only gut check for that question, but it's one of the things that people look at.
Definitely. Yeah.
That file count of 3, yeah, I can read through 3 files and be okay to kind of keep track of what's going on. But when the file count is 43, and sometimes they get into that neighborhood. It depends on what kind of change it is, but it can get pretty high, and then it becomes a burden for review as well.
Totally.
Yeah. So just you don't want to be too big to handle in one meeting, basically, right?
Yeah, typically. And it's like, again, if you're sticking to the acceptance criteria in the stories and in the issues, like you're going to be fine. I think it's whenever you start thinking like, oh, well, what if I do this extra thing just for fun or whatever? It's like, again, staying in scope, like that's what it means. Like stick to the particular issue that's in hand. So.
And to address kind of the underlying thing too, a lot of development teams, and a lot of times when you're sort of learning to begin with, and on a team like you might be on, one of the things that you have to learn how to do is to make sure that the problem that you're solving is not too big, or in some cases too small. But if it's too big, then you're going to be encouraged to break it up into pieces that don't take a really long time to write or review. It's one of those things that, like, if it takes you longer than a couple of days to write the code, then it's going to take you even longer to review it. And in many cases, velocity matters more than correctness in a big change. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. I'll wait till we're done and then I'll ask a question.
Okay. Cool. All right. So you can also mark your reviewed files as viewed. So that's another option in the GitHub UI. And again, that's just kind of help you keep track also of like what you've actually looked through. So that's also an option. Whoops, went backwards. All right, cool. I think one other thing, there are some resources. These, whenever I share out the slides, you'll be able to see these links. but there was another, whoops. There is something else in GitHub. I don't know, like whenever you were doing your pull request this week, you can actually view files side by side. So there's different ways to view changes, basically. So that's something that could be helpful, is to be able to see, like, it'll show you, you know, this is what the file was before. With this PR, these are the changes that are being introduced. So again, as a visual tool, it just kind of helps to like see exactly what's being added or removed in a particular file. So that's just something else to keep in mind. Cool. So that's kind of it. But we'd love to share your thoughts from this past week, you know, or in past experience as well, right? If you've had experience with code reviews, you know, how did it feel to do it this week? And, you know, what was it kind of like to have your code reviewed? Any kind of thoughts or feedback around any of those questions?
I can start.
Go for it, yeah.
I had a really, I think it was a really great experience for me because this was my first like official code review type situation. Like I've done a hackathon where everybody just kind of commits stuff to their branch and then it gets pulled without much review, or at least documentation for it. And the actual process itself was really enlightening because it helps me feel a bit more confident going into the workforce. Because okay, it's not so bad. Like, because I know Git and GitHub's a really big aspect of the job. And I think the mentors and our fellow Collabbies comments were really helpful. Like I know Ashel and Sarah had answered one of the questions I had in the inline comments of our code. And all the mentors had really great comments about like, you know, how to make it better. And yeah, it was good because even like I know what clean code looks like, and I'm just like, wow, I can't believe I really did just leave a console log there, and you know, so just the little things to help make your code from great to like exceptional type of thing. So I really appreciate everyone's comments and like how detailed everything was, and I understand now like avoiding like, you know, looks good to me type of comments. So I think like going forward, I'll put more effort into trying like, you know, seeing if there's things that I know that could make it better. Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah.
I'll echo all of what Alex said, but also it was really nice to do pair programming because we never did it at bootcamp. Well, we did this thing called mob programming where 3 or 4 people worked all at once. But it was only like one day. And so it's really nice to be able to work with someone because, you know, communication is key and I need practice on that. So it was really nice having that opportunity.
I will say as a little tangent that the PR template that we use is like so amazing. Like I love it. Everything is laid out super clearly. It's like pretty interactive, right? With, you know, showing what kind of changes happened and all of that. And so when I first got my job back in January, I brought the template with me. I was like, hey, can we use that? We ended up, we're still using it on our team. So it's like, you know, you can definitely use this template outside of Collab Lab. But it just definitely helps to have like an organized, like, you know, kind of like very approachable kind of like tool to use like that. So again, huge fan of that template. And I think it really just kind of helps organize everything. So something to think about.
I'll add thank you for that. And everything people have been saying, I had no idea how supportive this environment would be. So I'm just really grateful for all of you. It just didn't get anywhere near this amount of love at boot camp. So this is great. And I did say it looks good to me, and I will learn to do better next time. But I also know I'm also very humble and say this is all brand new. Even
Yeah.
as, you know, I was a former teacher, and I always knew good job sucked. It was always I like the way you wrote that sentence. I like the way you introduced your topic. You know, so right now it's more like learning from all of you and seeing your code. I am going, oh, okay, that's interesting. Oh yeah, like I didn't know not to leave a console login. I might have thought that was a good habit to show, hey, I console log. So good to know that they're not as interested in learning as much as maybe how things, you know, end up as a result. This is a big difference from
Yeah.
more of an industry standard as opposed to, hey, you're learning in a boot camp, like good for you, you know. So it's all great stuff, and I'm happy to be learning so much.
When I saw the console log, I was like, when I tried to work through the issue, like I think I worked through the issue maybe, a few days ago or a few days before y'all started just to try it out. And that was exactly the first thing I put in, was like, am I even getting this data set? And I think that my local commits still have that console log. In any case, like when I saw it, I actually thought like, why doesn't our ESLint block it? But it's probably like it could be like that's a little bit too much of a overreach on tooling. But anyway, point is, I've never done mob programming. I'm actually curious to see how that even works. But yeah, I might have to ask one of y'all about that offline. Like, never done it before, don't know what that's like. I thought y'all did a great job of taking the different feedback items in stride, and it's a case too of like you need to get something up and working and kind of keep moving and move on to the next phase of things. What you mentioned, Randall, a minute ago about like looks good to me. I mean, to be fair, there's like a weighed risk. Like there's a deploy preview that you look at and it's got exactly what you expect to see. And they only changed one file, so how bad could it be? In any case, it's the sort of thing that you live and you learn in terms of what's appropriate, what's not. Raise your hand if you've ever had to revert something in production. Yeah, it happens.
All the time.
Happens a lot.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think
Randall, did you have a question that you had before? Yeah. You were kind of hanging on to it. If you forgot it, you can always.
I do. I was gonna ask. I'm assuming the pace we're going at is really slow because this is only a 5-hour thing, right? I was curious in industry, how much of this might get done in a day, right? Out of like this whole list of to-dos that we've got. What's typical for in your experience, the kind of places you work pace-wise, and I guess how much code you're doing every day before you're reviewing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it depends on kind of what's on the roadmap of the team, like what needs to get done. What we do, I mean, we have a board that's very similar to this in GitHub that has a bunch of issues listed. And so, we'll do a 2-week sprint, right? And so we kind of point each story. So we're going to say this story, we think will take like 1 or 2 days of work. And then we all get assigned a certain number of stories. So, there's a balance between just like writing code. There's also like researching, how you're going to solve something. Like you're not constantly typing at a keyboard, I would say. It's like, there definitely is some like, some problem solving you have to do before you can actually like get to that point. So, and you'll see in our flow as well, it's like these first 2 issues were pretty straightforward.
Right.
I would say the jump up in issues 3 and 4 is actually like fairly decent. Like there's going to be a little bit more complexity this week. So you'll find that you'll probably be spending a bit more time in pair programming together. So it just kind of depends. But yeah, I mean, definitely be aware of, that sense of balance. I think a lot of teams are very mindful of burnout. They, if you're at a place that's like telling you to work like, after hours, whatever, like just overloading the stuff, like that's going to lead to burnout really fast. And I think that's something to like really explore and like kind of take a step back from. But again, that's just kind of something to be aware of on your own. So
I think at least in my experience, the thing that takes longer is the code review. And it's because of like the team that I'm on, that there's one principal engineer and there's me and there's an intern. That's it. So it's just whenever the principal can get to it and he's not designing other stuff or not, working through meetings or whatever, then he can get back to that review. And sometimes I'll assign the intern to review my stuff, and sometimes I'll take reviews instead of the principal. But again, it kind of depends on the team that you're on. And as far as scale of line count, yeah, I think the next two issues are probably going to have higher line counts on them.
Okay.
But don't worry, you got it.
I mean,
Speaking of next
I feel
issues,
supported.
Oh, I have
we
a
got
question.
you. Oh yeah, go for it, Ashok.
So when we're demoing our feature, we're demoing on production, and this is a silly question, but how do we demo on production instead of localhost? Do we just like run npm build or something like that?
So if you look in the GitHub repo, there's a page called Project Brief. And I think it's one of the first 1 or 2 links on the page. It mentions like where the site actually is. So the GitHub repo, the tooling and everything is set up already so that every time something gets merged to main, it gets deployed to that site.
Gotcha.
So when we refer to production, that's what we mean in this case. If it was something else that we were making, production might mean something else. But in general, it just means that you've already merged it into main. It's already part of the project now. Like it's not a feature anymore. It's not a feature branch. It's not local anymore. It's straight up there.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
Yep, no worries.
All right, yeah, we've got about 10 minutes, so let's get through issues number 3 and 4. And then we'll get those assigned to the pairs for this week. So Matt, take it away.
Dope. All right, hope y'all can see my screen. All right, so this is issue number 3. A shopping list is a set of items associated with a specific 3-word token. So that talks about, you might find in the code base the words my test list. And that right now is the token that you test with. We need to allow a user to start new lists so they can save things that they need to buy. To start a new list, you'll have to do a few things. You'll have to generate a new unique 3-word token. You'll have to save the token to local storage, the browser's local storage. And you'll have to show the user the list view, kind of representing what that token has associated with it. Up to this point, the app has rendered the items in the list associated with the token my test list. Before we can allow users to make new lists, we have to stop showing them that test list. So in terms of the acceptance criteria, you'll be installing a package called the Collab shopping list utils. And that's going to be added as a dependency. And you're also going to be making it such that the string my test list in app.js is replaced with null so that they're not automatically just subscribed to that, kind of test list. So if the user doesn't already have a token, then they're going to have a button on the home component that allows them to create a new list. And if they click the button, then it's going to generate a new token, save it to local storage, and then and you're going to use a function called setListToken to do that. And then also once the token has been created and saved, the user is redirected to the list view. And if the user does already have a token, then they'll be automatically redirected to the list view with whatever list is represented by that token. So a couple of notes on it. Generate token function. That's the name of the one that you should be using to generate that token. It has a link to the documentation for it and kind of a sample of what that import statement at least looks like within the file that you'll be working in. SetListToken takes the new list token as an argument. It kind of gives you a link to what the wireframe looks like or what the wireframe will be for the welcome homepage. It's good to look at it now just so you're not going in like the wrong direction with what you're making, but bear in mind, just stick to the scope of the ticket. For this reason, it's sufficient just to have a simple create list button. You don't have to save the token to Firestore within the scope of this ticket, but sometimes people do as they address this one. All right. Any questions before we read the other one? Okay. All right, so this is number 4. As a user, I want to add a new item to the shopping list so I can start recording purchases. So users need to be able to add items to the shopping list, and there's going to be an add item view that you've now got working with the routing. it should be present. It should present the user with a form that allows them to put in two things: the name of the item, and then an estimate of when they would buy it again, likely. Looks like there's a README file for the shopping list API that you can refer to as you work through this. So let's talk about the acceptance criteria. The add item view displays a form that allows them to enter the name of the item and select how soon they anticipate needing to buy it again. There should be 3 choices: so soon, kind of soon, and not soon. And those correspond to 7 days, 14 days, and 30 days, week, 2 weeks, and a month. The input that accepts the name of the item has a semantic label element associated with it. The user can submit the form with both the mouse and the enter key. Y'all might have questions about it, you might not. When the user submits the form, they see a message indicating that the item either was or was not saved to the database. So you'll need to kind of keep track of when you make that API call, what happened. The console log in the add item function is replaced with a function that adds the new document to the Firestore database. The function will be imported from the Firebase Firestore module. And we've already got Firebase Firestore in the project, I think, so you shouldn't have to install it new. The user's soon, not soon, kind of soon choice is used to calculate this date, next purchase date. So you can keep an eye out for that function as you're working through this. When the feature is implemented correctly, new items should automatically show up in the list view because we're using the stream list item function that gets new data from Firestore every time there's a change. You'll know your label is correctly implemented if you click on the label and the keyboard focus moves to the related input. And there's some MDN docs that talk about that. Users will be able to submit the form with either the enter key, or you can use the click for like a submit button. So it kind of gives you a little warning here. If you're using on key down, you might be overthinking it. All right, so the add item form has the potential to be a lot of scope. The wireframe for the add item page has several notes related to accessibility and UX. All right, that was a readout on the issue. Any questions on it so far? See something in the chat. Let me see if I can find what
No, nothing in the chat.
it's just okay.
I will say definitely lean into the Firestore docs, right? Read through those readmes, especially if you've never worked with any of that before. Like this is essentially our database, right? So this is how you'll be saving things, retrieving them, etc. So it's nothing too crazy, but it does have a little bit of a different feel from maybe your traditional APIs that maybe you've worked with in the past. So just something to be aware of.
All right. Anybody got a preference in these pairs of which, who takes what?
Shell, if you don't, any preference?
Well, the pairs this week.
I'm leaning towards the first one, but I'm okay with either.
Okay. So the pairs this week are Sarah and Alex, and then Shell and Randall. So Randall, you said you were leaning toward the first one of the list?
I was reading up on tokens yesterday, so but I'm open to either. If the other pair wants to do it, I have no problem learning either one.
Okay. Any other preferences on the table? Nope.
I kind of also leaning toward issue 1, but only because I'm not as familiar with it than the second issue. But at the same time, like I'm sure I can learn a lot from the pull request, so I don't have a strong preference. So I'm okay with doing the second one as well.
Okay.
But I guess like maybe if you guys could recommend some Firebase token stuff for me to read up on, just like on my own, I think I'll be able to scratch that itch as well. So
yeah, totally check out the docs that are linked in the issues. I think that would be a good place to start for sure.
Yeah.
Sarah and Michelle, did y'all have any preferences or?
I was leaning more towards the second issue, or issue 4 in this case, which is
let's do 4 then. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sounds good. So it's going to be Michelle and Randall on 4.
Sarah's happy with either.
Alex. All right, sounds good. So yeah, I'll set up the channels and stuff to reflect that. I think as far as the token thing, at least from what I remember, like I worked ahead of it a little bit, but in general, like the generate token function that it refers to really does just generate 3 random words. And then when you call set list token, if I remember correctly, what that does is it takes care of the local storage for you, if I remember right, like when you actually call that. And then things just sort of fall into place from there, if that makes any sense. But getting the token into Firebase as something that it should use of like what to show and to create a new list, literally create a new list within Firebase. I think that was the note at the bottom that it says like doesn't necessarily fall into the scope, but some people do it. So we'll see how that turns out. Oh, perfect. Thanks, DJ.
Yeah. All right. Awesome work this week, everybody. Again, this next set of issues will probably be a little bit more complex. So again, be loud in Slack, ask questions, reach out. And yeah, we'll pick it up again next Saturday, same time, same place. I will be doing office hours later this week. Did y'all meet this past Thursday? Was that right?
I missed my chance. I wanted to.
I'll send out an invite. I'm pretty flexible. So like, something midweek, Wednesday, Thursday, we'll hopefully work for everyone. But like I said, I'll send out a little doodle, probably tomorrow. So, yeah. Any last questions before we split?
No, just a huge thanks to everyone. This is great.
Awesome job. All right. Thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and we'll see you next week.
See you later.
Everyone. Have a good Saturday.
Good luck, Sarah. Happy healing. Speedy healing.